Hello, welcome to another program of Study the Word. Every week this is brought to you by the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh, Indiana. We're glad you've joined us, folks. We're going to be dealing with a Bible question that centers around Easter and when did it start and other questions that surround it, so we hope you'll stay tuned for the next half hour. We want to remind you of a couple of things before we answer that question. First of all, you're going to notice a phone number at the bottom of your screen. Please note that number. Have it handy. If a question comes to mind, we'd love to hear from you. Also, you can call in and take advantage of some of the free Bible study helps that we offer. I'll mention them at the end of our program, but you will also see them come up throughout the program, also at the bottom of your screen. Please take note of our website. You can find our location and our times of services. And as much as we'd love to have you come and be with us, but we realize sometimes that's just not possible, maybe from where you live or other commitments. But if you'd like to check us out on the internet, our services are streamed live over our website. And even if you don't go there during our times of services, everything is saved in the archive. So please check us out on the internet. And one more quick note, we do save all our programs on DVD, so if you would ever like a free copy, just let us know. That's why you keep that phone number handy. Alright, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to talk a little bit about Easter. This program is going to air on Easter Sunday, as people refer to it. And a lot of people have been planning for this weekend, starting out with Good Friday that they refer to, and then Saturday and then Sunday. And of course that celebration all centers around the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And of course here I am talking about Easter, and is it biblical? Well, obviously the concept of Jesus dying and resurrecting is biblical. But what we want to do is we want to go back to its beginning and trace it, because a lot of people are wondering, where did Easter come from? Is it something that we need to celebrate today? And we'll also answer the question, can you celebrate Easter and it not be religious? And so we'll talk about a number of those different things. First of all, we need to find out, is the concept of Easter even found within the Bible? Well, obviously, if somebody has the definition of Easter, of celebrating the resurrected Christ, well, that's in the Bible, okay? Of course, you could come up with any kind of terminology and say that, well, that represents this particular Bible story. But actually, the concept of Easter did not originate with God, although some people would argue that point. You see, folks, I have in my hand a Bible that's the King James Version. And a lot of people think that you can only use the King James Version, which is wrong, and we've dealt with that on other programs. But I want to notice something here in the book of Acts, reading from the King James Version. In verse 1 beginning it says, "Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James the brother of John with a sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of the unleavened bread." Now notice verse 4. "And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to the four quadrants of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." Oh, so Easter was around back then. Well, there's a few problems with that. Number one, we find that this was something that the Jews were celebrating and not the church, because they were persecuting the church. They were persecuting Christians. Well, what is this Easter then? Well, it was a word that man put in when they translated from Greek to English. But really the proper word there would be the word Passover. And that fits in the context. Here I have a New King James. Now, just simply because I have the New King James, it doesn't mean, well, that has to be wrong because we have a different version. But again, we're going to be establishing when the concept of Easter originated, but it didn't originate here because, again, the Jews were celebrating the feast of Passover. And for some reason in 1611, with the King James Version, they threw in the word Easter. And now here, I'll just read it here out of the New King James, and you can read it in other versions also. In verse 4, so when they had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after the Passover. Of course, in the context, he was trying to appease the Jews. And the Jews liked it when persecution was brought against the church, the Christians of that time, because it opposed what those Jews were teaching, Judaism. Okay, well, that's just a quick point. But let's just talk a little bit more about Easter and where did it originate from. Well, the concept itself, since it's not found in the Bible, we know that it didn't come from man. Yes, or it did come from man. I understand that we read in the Bible the death, burial, and resurrection. Matter of fact, we come together as Christians to remember Jesus' death every first day of the week, as we're commanded to. In Acts chapter 20, verse 7, the Christians came together on the first day of the week, of every week, to break bread, to remember the death of Jesus. And so that's definitely biblical, that we break bread and we remember Jesus that way. But as far as the feast or that celebration of Easter, that didn't come into play until about 325 when there was a council, the Council of Nicaea. And the reason why, and first of all, let me clear up this concept of having a council. Where's that in the Bible? Well, you had religious leaders, just like they had religious leaders in Bible times and in New Testament times. For example, over in Acts chapter 23, we'll just notice a council there. Don't think just because you have a council that it's authorized. Within the church today, they're not church councils. There's just Christians, and we follow the head, which is Jesus. But councils have been around. You know, these organizations that are formed by man for man. In this case, they might say for the church, but there's no authorization for that. In Acts chapter 23 and verse 1, it says, And Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him in the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And those who stood by said, Do you revile God's high priest? Again, the high priest, this council, this isn't the church, this was these Judaizing teachers. And they had their council. And of course they were even being inconsistent with what they taught, and that's what upset Paul. But don't think just because there's a council that it's God approved. And you can clearly see from this. Now, a passage that I have to bring into play here, and it ties into what we're talking about when I said, where did this originate? This concept of Easter, did it originate from the mind of man or from God? We need to see that it originated from the mind of man. Man made it, and they admit that they made it from 325 AD with the Council of Nicaea. In Matthew chapter 15, I read in verse 7, Jesus said, Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. That's the point. It's like the 16th chapter. If you just go over to the next page, you will find there that he talks about when Jesus said, Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And Peter and the other apostles were saying, well, some say you're John the Baptist or Elijah, one of the prophets. And then, of course, Jesus turns around and says, well, who do you say that I am? And then Peter answered and said, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, verse 17 of Matthew 16 says, Jesus responded by saying, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. So when he asked them, who am I? And Peter responded properly, he was commended because he didn't get that information from flesh and blood. It was divine, and the message came from above. And so when people talk about Easter and its origin, they need to understand that it did not originate with God. God did not create Easter, the celebration of it. Man came up with that, wanting to, glorify and celebrate the resurrected Christ. And of course, you can't really fault the idea behind it. That's a good thing. But it would be similar today if we wanted to have a baptizo day. That's the Greek transliterated word for baptism. And said, well, we're going to pick a day out of the year that represents when Jesus was baptized. We can read where Jesus was baptized by John. And we're going to say, let's call it the Baptizo Day. And somebody might say, well, Chuck, if you guys come up with this celebration, this church celebration of Baptizo Day in honor of Jesus being baptized, somebody might say, well, where do you get your authority for that? Well, we don't have any authority, but we could come back and say, but it's biblical. Wasn't Jesus baptized? And we'd say, well, yeah. Well, then this is just celebrating his baptism, and we have a Baptizo celebration day. You see, it's something that we've invented, which is not authorized within the Word of God. Is it okay to talk about and appreciate that Jesus was baptized? Well, of course, you could do that. Are we happy that Jesus resurrected from the dead? Yes. But should we tell people that churches today are to celebrate Easter? That's a man-made doctrine. Now, we need to talk about this a little bit because, some people are saying, well, it's wrong to want to hold to an occasion like the resurrection of Jesus. Some people might say, well, it's not in the Bible, therefore you shouldn't celebrate anything. And so if you have an Easter egg hunt for your kids, you're sinning. If you buy chocolate bunnies, you're sinning. Well, let's talk a little bit about this because there's a reason why in 325 AD that religious leaders wanted to have an Easter, because it was to combat paganism in their minds. Because pagans celebrated the god of fertility, and it was represented with rabbits, with being fertile and eggs and all of that. And so the religious leaders wanted to get people out of paganism, so they took some of their concepts but put a religious concept or connotation to it, that it would be easy for them to come out of paganism, keeping some of their practices, but attaching it to the resurrected Jesus. Well, you don't have to do that. Just stay with the Bible and preach what the Bible teaches. Now, I want us to understand that we have to be careful when you start binding things on people and telling people that you have to do things religiously. Let me just show you and clear up some of the misunderstandings and maybe some of the extremism that exists out there. If I were to tell you that, well, I gather with Christians every Sunday and we remember the death of Jesus and we'll preach about the resurrection, but we don't have an Easter service because it's not found within the Bible. And somebody says, well, Chuck, if you don't celebrate Easter, that means you don't celebrate the resurrected Jesus. Well, that's not true. We preach about it and we're thankful that he resurrected from the dead, but that celebration was something that man invented. God did not invent it. Just remember, like that Baptizo Day. We can invent all kinds of things, but we don't have any right to do that. That's coming up with man-made laws that we read about in Matthew chapter 15. In vain do you worship me, teaching his commandments of man, teaching the commandments of God as if they're from God, but they're really from man. And that's the problem. Now, I want to really show you something that we need to be aware of, to show you that you can celebrate something in a non-religious way. And it's okay. Really? Yeah. People can do things that somebody might consider religious, but you can celebrate it in a non-religious way and it be pleasing to God. Now, I've got a couple of Bible examples for us to see. Now, the first one is found over in Galatians chapter 5, and Paul, warning about bringing things over from the Old Testament, said in verse 2, "Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing." Now, that's pretty strong that Paul would say that. Well, because he mentioned it, because if you're going to bring something over from the old law and try to bind it on people today, he's saying Christ will profit you nothing. But then I go to a passage like Acts chapter 16, and it says in verse 3, Paul wanted to have him go on with him. He was talking about Timothy. He took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in that region, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Now we have Paul taking Timothy and circumcising him. Now, is Paul some kind of hypocrite? He tells the Galatian brethren, if you're circumcised, Christ profits you nothing. And then he goes ahead and takes Timothy and gets him circumcised. What's Paul doing here? Is he just playing that hypocrite? Well, no, because what he's trying to show is that, you know what? If you're going to bind circumcision on people, then you're going to sin. Now, if you want to just circumcise because you want to do it, in Paul's case, it was just, he figured it would just make it easier for him when people are going to question him and he's trying to teach other people, just trying to fit in. That's okay in that respect, because you know what? You can do it non-religiously. That's the point. You can just do it. I mean, people today, if we read that passage in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 2, if you're circumcised, Christ profits you nothing, and parents had their children, their boys circumcised, they might think, oh no, I've sinned. Well, no, only if you're teaching that you had to do it. In your mind, if you're saying we had to do this or we'd be sinning, well, that would be wrong. See, you can do something, right? That's my point. You can celebrate something or practice something that doesn't have to be connected with anything religiously. That's the point we're trying to make here. Let me read another passage to you over in the book of Colossians. I'm going to begin reading in chapter 2 and in verse 16. And what he's going to be talking about there, where Paul was condemning them for some of their practices, he says, therefore let no one judge you in food or drink or regarding festivals or a new moon or Sabbath. Don't let anybody judge you and think that you're supposed to keep those things. Of course they're going to judge you because that's what they practiced. And people will judge you for that. It's kind of like people today might judge you if you don't have an Easter service, as if you don't believe in the resurrected Jesus. Of course I believe in Jesus. I preach him all the time. But as far as Easter, celebration for the church, and command that the church should do that, we don't have any authority for that. Paul is saying here, don't let anybody judge you that way. But there is an interesting passage here over in the book of Romans, the 14th chapter. Now here's where respect has to come in. All right? Now Paul is dealing in the 14th chapter about respecting opinions, not differences in doctrine, but opinions. And notice what he does here. He says in verse 2, he says, for one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, And let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes a day, observes it to the Lord. He who does not observe the day, to the Lord he does not observe it. He who eats, to the Lord, for he gives God thanks. And he who does not eat, to the Lord, he does not eat and gives God thanks. Now let me explain what he's talking about here. He's talking about respecting one another. First of all, he talks about those people who eat vegetables don't condemn the person who eats meat. And the person who eats meat don't condemn the person who just eats vegetables. And he talks about those people that esteem one day above another. Respect one another. This person wants to esteem this day, let them do it. You know, I've talked about people who need to understand that we're not under the Sabbath. Jesus nailed the old law to the cross, so we don't keep the Sabbath, to keep it holy. Christians come together on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, Acts chapter 20, and in verse 7. And if a person says, you know what, Chuck, I know that. I worship every first day of the week, but I just want to, on the Saturday, I just don't want to work. I just feel like it's just best when I read in the Bible, just have a day of rest. I don't want to work on Saturday. I know that Sunday's the day the church comes together and worships God, but I would just like to keep that Saturday, people call it the Sabbath, but I just want to just not work on that day. Fine. Well, you can do that. Now the person says, well, Chuck, I feel I can work on that day. Fine. That's what he's talking about here. Because both are doing it unto the Lord. I'm going to not keep the day unto the Lord. I'm going to keep the day unto the Lord. In other words, I'm just going to do what I want to do. It's my choice. We're talking about matters of opinion here. One is not binding on the other. Now, if a church, on the other hand, says we're going to do this, now you're binding it on all the members. You can't do that. You can't bind the celebration of Easter on the whole church. But if somebody wants to esteem one day above another, that's their choice. That's what he's talking about here, respecting their opinion. And we need to understand that. And so this is why you can have people, three categories, three kinds of people when it comes to Easter. What? You can have somebody who says, okay, a church has to do that. Well, that would be wrong. There's no authority for that. So a person says, you know what? I think churches need to keep the celebration of Easter and have an Easter service. Well, you don't have any authority for that. You find somebody who says, well, we don't have any authority for that, but I think I can just celebrate it in a non-religious way because I don't care about paganism. Well, that's fine too. You can do that. But then the third category, you might have somebody who says, well, I don't think it's in the Bible, or I know it's not in the Bible, and but I'm not even going to celebrate it in a secular way. Even though I know it's not, I don't want anything to do with an Easter egg hunt or anything like that. Well, that's fine. They can do that too. See, this is what he was talking about in Romans chapter 14. This is what he's talking about over in Galatians chapter 5, of understanding the difference between binding and just doing something in a non-religious way. You bind circumcision because you think religiously you have to. That's wrong. Can you be circumcised in a non-religious way just to do it for whatever reason? Yes, you can. So when it comes to Easter, we can understand that there will be people who say that, you know what, I don't want to do this religiously. Can I do it in a non-religious way? Well, of course you can. Now, some people make the point that since Easter is connected with paganism, that anybody that has an Easter egg hunt or, has chocolate bunnies or whatnot are engaging in paganism. Well, that's not true at all. Just because you're celebrating something doesn't mean that you're going along with paganism. It's kind of like the person who talks about, well, what day is this? Well, it's March or January or February. And those days are, what's the what is the origin of those names? Well, we talk about these gods, the god of Thor, the days of the week, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you trace those words back, and you have Greek mythology, and you have all these small letter G gods that these months are named after. So just because we use the month and the day, does that mean we're acknowledging paganism and that we support it? Well, of course not. It doesn't mean anything. So you got to watch the extremes that are out there, and that's what Jesus was trying to avoid when he had Paul writing by inspiration in Romans 14, as far as respecting convictions that people have. People like to go to extremes, and we have to use the scriptures as the guidelines for us. And so let's just, I just wanted us to be aware of what the Bible had to say about Easter, and how that, it's not our place to bind something upon others, and how that you can actually celebrate something in a non-religious way. And if you do something in a religious way on your own, as long as you don't violate other passages of Scripture or other things that the Bible talks about that you have to do. For example, if somebody says, I want to have Saturday as a day of rest, well, you can't make your Saturday your first day of the week, because first day of the week is Sunday. You can't say, well, I'm going to worship on Saturdays instead of Sunday. Well, you can't do that. Now you're violating passage of Scripture as far as not forsaking the assembly of coming together as a church on the first day of the week. So you need to make sure that you handle the Word of God properly. And so during the course of this study, maybe you've got some questions and you want it cleared up. Please contact us. You might say, well, Chuck, what about this or what about that? Well, I'll give you a Bible answer for that. This lesson was to provoke thinking, and I hope that we achieved that. And I hope you'll always be a student of the Word. We want to help you in any way that we can. People say, well, you just do stuff just to be controversial. No, we're just trying to help people to be aware of what the Bible teaches and what it doesn't teach. And we offer free home Bible study courses or even a face-to-face Bible study. If you'd like that, please contact us. We can put you on the mailing list for our weekly bulletin. That's free. Don't forget our weekly radio program that's live every Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, 98.5 on your FM dial. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, if you want a copy of today's program on DVD, you can go ahead and request that. We'd love to hear from you folks. These free Bible study helps that we offer to you are just help you to become familiar with the Word of God. The Church of Christ that meets at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh is just 2 miles east of Castle High School. Come and be with us. We meet every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock for Bible study and 10 o'clock for worship, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon again. Every Wednesday at 7 o'clock, and we have classes for all age groups. Bring the whole family. We'd love to have you. You'd be our honored guest. Don't forget our website and our services being streamed over that live. Thank you for being with us. We hope you'll be back next week as we once again open up our Bibles and study the Word. Thank you, and have yourselves a great day.